Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive. You know, it's got to be good. One of the most iconic personal development books ever, Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, yeah, a classic.
We've got excerpts from the book itself, so no interpretations here, straight from the source. And we're on a quest to uncover those golden nuggets that can help you, the listener, level up your life.
I think what's so cool about the 7 Habits is that it goes beyond just those surface level self-help tips. It really digs into those core principles of how we operate in every area of life, personal relationships, work, how we interact with others. It's not about quick fixes. It's about building that foundation for lasting effectiveness.
Yeah, it's like Covey saying, hey, let's look at the operating system of your life, not just the apps you're running.
That's a great way of on it.
And one of the first things that he tackles is this idea of paradigms. He argues that our paradigms, like the way we see the world, they literally shape our experiences.
Yeah, you can think of it like this. If you're using a map of Detroit, but you're trying to get to Chicago,
Uh-oh,
you are going to end up lost and frustrated, no matter how good your driving skills are.
you're just going in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And Covey says the same thing applies to our lives. If we're operating with the wrong map in our minds, our efforts might be completely misdirected. We might be working really hard, but heading in the wrong direction.
It's like running on a treadmill. You're putting in the effort, but you're not actually going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a good moment for a little self-reflection. What are some of the maps that you've encountered in your own life that might need revisiting?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Maybe it's a belief about your own abilities, or a limited view of what's possible, or even an outdated strategy that you're still clinging to at work.
It's worth taking the time to examine those maps, because Covey argues that true effectiveness starts with aligning our actions with the right principles, what he calls the character ethic.
Okay, so tell me more about this character ethic. How does it differ from what Covey calls the personality ethic?
All right, so the personality ethic is all about techniques and quick fixes. It's things like, learning how to manipulate people or faking confidence. It can be tempting to focus on those surface level techniques, especially in a world that values outward appearances.
It's like the Instagram filter of life, right?
Exactly.
Like everything looks perfect on the surface, but underneath, who knows?
Yeah, but Covey says these techniques, they're kind of like cramming on a farm.
Cramming on a farm, I love that.
Yeah, you can't just force growth or manipulate natural systems, just like you can't rush the growth of crops. True personal growth takes time and a solid foundation.
So true.
And he tells this story about his own son who was struggling in school. And initially, Covey tried using all these different techniques to help, but they actually backfired because deep down, his perception of his son wasn't aligned with those techniques.
Yeah, I think we've all been there trying those quick fixes that ultimately don't work. It's like thinking you can get fit by just drinking diet soda. Like it ignores the deeper issues.
Exactly. It's not addressing the root cause.
So Covey's arguing that we need to cultivate those core principles of character, things like integrity, honesty, fairness, to achieve true effectiveness.
Absolutely. And he introduces this idea of a maturity continuum to illustrate the progression from dependence to independence to interdependence.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly does he mean by the maturity continuum?
So think about learning to ride a bike.
Okay,
At first, you're dependent on someone to hold you up, right?
you need those training wheels.
Exactly. Then you gain independence, you can ride on your own. But true mastery comes with interdependence. It's like joining a cycling team. You're strong individually, but you can achieve even more by working together, leveraging each other's strengths.
So relating this back to the listener, are you saying that we can't build strong relationships if we haven't mastered ourselves first?
Precisely, Covey uses the analogy of trying to play tennis with a golf club. It's simply the wrong tool for the job.
Not going to work.
Right, trying to achieve effectiveness in highly interdependent situations when we haven't even developed our own independence. That's setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, it's like showing up to a cooking competition without knowing how to boil water. You
Exactly.
got to have the basics down.
You got it.
Okay, so let's move into like the practical application of these principles, especially in relationships. Covey talks about this idea of the PPC balance, which stands for production capability, and he illustrates it with the classic story of the goose that laid the golden egg.
Oh, yeah, I love that story.
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
So the goose represents our relationships, our ability to produce those golden eggs of positive interactions and outcomes. But too often we focus solely on the golden eggs, the results, without tending to the goose itself.
We just want the good stuff.
Exactly. We want the benefits without putting in the work, but we need to invest in building strong relationships. That's the production capability, to actually reap the rewards with those positive interactions, the production.
So you can't keep getting golden eggs if you neglect the goose.
Exactly. You've got to take care of the source.
I'm thinking of like a boss who only cares about hitting targets but doesn't invest in their team's well-being, or a parent who's so focused on their child's achievements that they forget to nurture the relationship itself.
Right. It's about the long game. It's about building trust, creating a sustainable system for success.
It's about sustainability for sure. And speaking of building trust, Covey introduces another powerful metaphor, the emotional bank account.
Ah, yes, this is a good one.
So tell me more about this. What does he talks about here?
So, the emotional bank account is a metaphor for understanding how trust operates in relationships. Every interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal.
Okay.
Simple acts of courtesy, kindness, keeping commitments, those are deposits that build trust.
So like putting those good vibes in, right?
Exactly. But things like disrespect, breaking promises, being judgmental, those are withdrawals that chip away at that trust.
It's like you're overdrafting your relationship.
Exactly. And if we're constantly making withdrawals, that emotional bank account, it can become overdrawn, leading to communication breakdowns, conflict, resentment.
It makes me think about how important it is to be intentional about making deposits in our relationships. Those little things like listening attentively, offering words of encouragement, making time for quality interactions, those can make a huge difference.
It's the small things that add up over time.
And this leads us beautifully into the first of the 7 habits.
Yes, habit 1, be proactive.
And being proactive is not just about taking initiative, right?
It's more than that.
It's about taking responsibility for our own choices and actions.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our response, even in challenging circumstances. Instead of blaming external factors or playing the victim, we focus on what we can control.
That reminds me of something we were talking about earlier with those paradigms. It's like choosing to look at the map of Chicago instead of Detroit. It's about choosing the right map for the journey you want to take.
That's a great connection. And how does the language we use reflect our proactivity or lack thereof?
Oh, that's interesting.
Covey points out that reactive language like I can't or they made me feel, that puts the control outside of ourselves.
It makes you feel powerless.
Right. But proactive language like I choose or I will, that empowers us to take ownership.
It's like taking the reins of your life.
Exactly. And Covey uses this incredibly powerful anecdote about Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp. Even in those horrific circumstances, Frankl found a way to choose his response, demonstrating the ultimate power of proactivity.
That's such a powerful example. It's a reminder that we always have a choice, no matter how difficult the situation may seem. And this leads us to one of the most practical tools from the 7 habits, the circles of concern and influence.
All right, let's dive into those.
So tell me more about these circles. What are they, and how can they help us be more proactive?
So the circle of concern encompasses everything that worries us, things like the economy, politics, other people's opinions, even the weather, things we can't really control.
All those things that keep us up at night.
Right. The circle of influence included those things we can directly control, our own attitudes, actions, and responses.
So a proactive person focuses their energy on their circle of influence, right? Instead of dwelling on things they can't control, they channel their efforts towards what they can change.
Exactly. And often by focusing on our circle of influence, we can indirectly influence some aspects of our circle of concern.
I like that. So it's not about ignoring the things that worry us, but it's about focusing on where we can actually make a difference.
Precisely.
This is so insightful. I'm going to have to sit with this one for a minute. What about you, listener? What are some areas in your life where you might be focusing too much on your circle of concern? Could you shift to a more proactive approach?
It's a great question to ponder, and it leads us perfectly into habit 2.
Which is
Begin with the end in mind.
habit 2, begin with the end in mind. Okay, it sounds almost too simple, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's not just about setting goals. This is about something much deeper. It's about having a clear vision of your desired outcomes before you even start acting.
So it's like thinking before you do.
Exactly. And he uses the example of building a house. You wouldn't just start laying bricks without a blueprint, right?
No way. You'd end up with a disaster. Not a home.
Precisely. So you're saying we need a blueprint for our lives.
I guess so.
Yeah, Covey emphasizes the importance of what he calls the 2 creations. The first creation happens in our minds. It's that mental blueprint, the vision of what we want to achieve, and only then comes the second creation, the physical manifestation of that vision.
So if we don't invest the time and effort to create a clear mental picture, we risk making, costly mistakes in the real world.
Right. You got it. And how do we develop this mental blueprint?
Yeah, how do we do that?
One powerful tool that Covey recommends is writing a personal mission statement.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those, but I'll be honest, I always thought they were kind of cheesy.
I know a lot of people think that, but it's not just some feel-good exercise. It's about defining your core values, your purpose, what success means to you. It's like creating your own personal constitution.
Well, that's a good way to put it, like your guiding principles.
Exactly.
It's about getting crystal clear on what matters most to you, so you can align your actions accordingly.
Exactly. It's about living with intention.
This resonates with me on a personal level. I remember When I first started podcasting, I was all over the place trying to be everything to everyone. But once I really sat down and defined my mission, like my why for doing this, everything became so much clearer. My content improved, my audience grew, and most importantly, I felt a deeper sense of purpose in what I was doing.
That's awesome. That's a perfect example of how Habit 2 can play out in real life. It's not just about these grand visions for the future. It's about making choices each day that are aligned with our deepest values and goals.
Love that. All right, so we've got our blueprint. We're being proactive. Now it's time to actually get things done, which brings us to habit 3.
Yes, put first things first.
And this is where things get really interesting, right?
This is where the rubber meets the road. It's not just about time management. It's about aligning our actions with our priorities.
It's easy to get caught up in that whirlwind of urgent tasks, putting out fires all day. But Covey argues that true effectiveness lies in prioritizing what's truly important, not just what's screaming for our attention.
Right. It's about being intentional with our time and energy.
And he introduces a tool here that I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with, the time management matrix. But I think it's worth revisiting for those who haven't encountered it before.
Absolutely.
So can you break that down for us?
Yeah. So the matrix divides tasks into 4 quadrants: urgent and important, but not urgent, urgent but not important, and neither urgent nor important.
Okay, I'm following.
The key to effectiveness, Covey argues, is to spend more time in quadrant 2, the quadrant of important but not urgent activities.
So things like planning, relationship building, personal development activities that are essential for long-term success, but often get pushed aside by the tyranny of the urgent.
We all have those things.
I struggle with this all the time. It's so easy to get sucked into emails, meetings, all those little fires that pop up throughout the day.
Oh yeah, this can be so distracting.
But I know if I don't carve out time for those quadrant 2 activities, I'm not going to make progress towards my bigger goals.
You've got to be proactive about it.
For sure. And Covey highlights the distinction between leadership and management here, right?
Yes, he says that leadership is about identifying those first things, those quadrant 2 activities that will have the biggest impact, and management is about efficiently executing those tasks.
So it's about knowing what to focus on and then figuring out the best way to get it done.
Exactly. And he tells this funny story about his own son who was so focused on efficiency that he scheduled a 10-minute breakup call with his girlfriend.
Oh my gosh.
Right? It illustrates how sometimes we can get so caught up in being productive that we forget the human element, the importance of relationships.
Yeah, it's like we become robots, just going through the motions.
Right. It's a reminder that true effectiveness isn't just about checking things off our to-do list. It's about living a life that's aligned with our values, nurturing our relationships, and making time for those activities that bring us joy and fulfillment.
It's about living a whole life, not just a productive one.
Exactly.
So I have a question for you, the listener. Take a moment to reflect on how you're spending your time. How much of your day is spent in each of those quadrants? What shifts might you need to make to create more space for those important but not urgent activities?
It's a great question to ponder.
And these first 3 habits, be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first. They lay the foundation for what Covey calls private victories.
Right.
They're about mastering ourselves, developing our character, and taking responsibility for our own lives.
It's about that inner work.
And once we've achieved those private victories, we can move into the realm of public victory, which is all about effective interdependence.
Exactly.
And that brings us to habits 4, 5, and 6, right?
You got it. These are the habits that help us build strong, mutually beneficial relationships.
So it's about taking those personal victories and applying them to our interactions with others.
Precisely. And it all starts with habit 4, think win-win.
Habit 7, sharpen the saw. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the story behind this one?
So this habit is all about renewal. It's recognizing that we can't just keep giving and giving without taking the time to recharge our own batteries. It's like any tool. If you keep using a saw without sharpening it, it eventually becomes dull and ineffective.
So we need to sharpen ourselves in order to stay effective. I like that. But how do we actually sharpen the saw in the context of our lives?
Well, Covey talks about 4 key dimensions of renewal: physical, spiritual, mental, and social emotional.
Okay, 4 dimensions.
Yeah, and he emphasizes that neglecting any one of these dimensions, it can negatively impact the others.
So it's a holistic approach to self-care?
Exactly.
What are some specific examples of how we can renew ourselves in each of these dimensions?
Okay, so for physical renewal, it's about taking care of our bodies through exercise, healthy eating, getting enough sleep.
The basics.
Right, but it can also include things like spending time in nature, getting a massage, or even just taking a relaxing bath. It's about listening to your body's needs and finding activities that replenish your physical energy.
It's about feeling good.
Exactly. What about spiritual renewal?
Yeah, what does that look like?
So spiritual renewal is about waking with something larger than ourselves, whether that's through meditation, pray, spending time in nature, or engaging in activities that bring us a sense of purpose and meaning. It's about nourishing our souls and aligning ourselves with our core values.
I think a lot of people struggle with finding time for spiritual renewal, especially in our fast-paced, always-on world.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
But it's so important to make it a priority. When I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, I find that taking even just a few minutes to meditate, or even just sit in silence, it can make a huge difference in my mental and emotional state.
Absolutely. And for mental renewal, Covey recommends activities like reading, learning new things, engaging in thought-provoking conversations, or even just taking some time for quiet reflection. It's about keeping our minds sharp and expanding our
Like
horizons.
a mental workout.
Yeah, exactly. Challenging ourselves to think differently, to learn and grow.
And then there's the social-emotional dimension. How do we renew ourselves in that area?
So, social emotional renewal is about nurturing our relationships with others, building strong connections, and creating a sense of belonging and community. It could involve spending time with loved ones, joining a club or group volunteering, or simply creating an acts of kindness towards others.
It's about recognizing that we're social creatures and that our well-being is deeply intertwined with the quality of our relationships.
Exactly, we need those connections.
And Covey highlights the importance of what he calls the daily private victory, which is devoting at least an hour each day to renewing ourselves in all four of those dimensions.
Wow, an hour a day.
I know. It might seem like a lot to ask,
It's commitment.
but Covey argues that this is the quadrant 2 activity that sets the foundation for everything else. It's the investment we make in ourselves that allows us to show up fully in all areas of our lives.
So it's not selfish to prioritize our own well-being.
Not at all.
It's actually essential for our effectiveness and our ability to contribute to the world around us.
It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others.
Exactly, you can't pour from an empty cup.
So it's about creating that upward spiral of growth and continuous improvement.
Right. As we sharpen the saw, we become more effective in all areas of our lives. And this, in turn, allows us to make even greater contributions, leading to even more opportunities for growth and renewal.
It's a beautiful cycle. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the 7 habits, what's one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think the most important message is that effectiveness is not a destination. It's a journey. It's about continuous improvement, about making those small, consistent deposits in all areas of our lives, and recognizing that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Beautifully said. And to you, the listener, what resonated with you most from our deep dive today? What's one habit you want to focus on strengthening? Or one small step you can take today to move towards greater effectiveness in your own life?
We encourage you to keep exploring Covey's work and to share your own insights and discoveries along the way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the 7 habits of highly effective people. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharpening those saws.